Thank you, Karim, for that message. There's Morgan in Denu, who says a good morning. So now, do I hear Solo talking about democracy? It's a pity. We're here in this country when our tyrant president makes a comment that he is going to hand over power to an MPP candidate. And you think that's a funny comment, right? That is Morgan who sent that from Denu. There's also Afashani, who is sending this from Malewale. He says a good morning from the good people of, the good people of Wali Wali are proud of Honorable Abuba because of the tremendous development projects you implemented during your short term as Northern Regional Minister. The good people of Wali Wali constituency will reward your good efforts by massively voting for you as our MP in the next election. So obviously there's a lot of interest from Wali Wali. So I bring in Honorable. Good morning.
Good morning, Senna. Let me first of all also say good morning to your listeners out there, both online and on set. Honorable, you mentioned, rightly said it, we've met for the first time, and I think this is a pleasure. Your submissions, I think, have been very critical insights, and I'm very sure, being in your company, I'm going to get the opportunity to learn and sharpen my skills in this matter. Above all, senior comrade, Kwesi Pratt, to be here with him, in fact, is one of the best things that could have happened to me today. I'm really very grateful. On the issue of the coup in Niger, the situation in West Africa and in Africa with regards to the occurrence of coups is a mixed bag of both political, economic, and then imperialist interests that are interplaying in Africa and putting us in this difficulty. I remember in one of my courses somewhere when I was doing development, there was this issue about development being positively correlated with democracy. And that it is a normal thing that when countries practice democracy, it gives them the opportunity to embark on very effective development agenda. What do we see in Africa? The governments we have in most of the African countries and in West Africa, they have the sovereignty relies on the people, and these people, through a social contract, have given a mandate to a group of people to lead the economies. And if we ask ourselves the question, what is it that we want out of the democracy that we all yearn for? It's all about development. And this development, it is something that drags us to the conversation about the well-being of people who are governed. So my first submission is that our problem in the sub-region, and perhaps in the whole of Africa, is because we have been forced by developed nations to accept democracy that we still have not understood. Democracy for us in Africa and most of the sub-region has only succeeded in helping us establish government. And at the end, we have government without governance. Because government is all about being able to get a body responsible for the day-to-day administration of a state. But as to whether the government we have in place are actually pursuing programs and policies and exuding attitudes that will inure to an improvement in the well-being of the people, I dare say in most parts of West Africa and Africa, we don't have those government existing. Our institutions, as far as democracy is concerned, most of the countries in West Africa and Africa are paying special attention to the institution responsible for organizing elections, electoral commission. So the democracy in Africa and in West Africa and Africa is basically about financing and establishing an institution that will organize elections. And post-elections, once we establish a government, the processes and the policies and the institution that has to be established to ensure that the ultimate objective of bettering the people's life, allowing the masses who have reposed confidence in government agents to be able to rule the country, at the end of the day, do not see any improvement in their dignity and living standards as well as welfare. So the question then is, what is government or governance if in the end it does not culminate in the improvement of the well-being of the people? And therefore, it is therefore not surprising that when the military takes arms against a constitutionally elected government, the very people who put the government in place should have been very angry enough and kick against the coup plotters. But what do we see? Every time it happens, as it happens in Guinea, happens in Burkina Faso, happens in Mali, and as recently as it has happened in Niger, you find the masses pouring into the street to hail the coup plotters. To what extent can we then judge that coup to be illegitimate when the coup has the support of the people? Because the very people who put the government in place have found, in their opinion, a better alternative to the deposed government. Every coup maker finds justification in the limitations and the failures of an existing government. As you rightly said, Honorable, the coup makers catalog 3 important factors as being responsible for the coup. The insecurity in the sub-region. They talked about worsening economic conditions. And above all, they talked about the issue of corruption. Should we be asking the rhetorical question that a corrupt government and a government that cannot secure security for its people and a government that cannot better the economic welfare of its people, to what extent can we describe such government as a legitimate government? Because a legitimate government is not just about being elected through proper electioneering process. A legitimate government is also about a government that delivers its mandate. And the mandate that has to be delivered in all purposes and intent can never end at how much public speeches we are able to deliver, but the core of it is to what extent are the people you govern experiencing dividends and better living conditions from the resources they have entrusted into your care as government. So, one of the key highlights of my submission this morning is to say that it is unfortunate coups are happening in the sub-region, but it is more unfortunate that our governments are not living up to expectation. Failure to live up to expectation becomes the breeding grounds for which this military, which unfortunately have a core mandate of protecting the democracy, they have the mandate to protect the territorial integrity of our nations, and yet the instrument of cohesion that has been given to them to be able to secure our democracy, those same instruments are being used against the vote of the people. Because when I say the vote of the people, I'm referring to the issues where a constitutionally elected government put in place by the people is removed. And instead of attracting the anger and the wrath of the people who voted that particular government, they rather receive public recommendations and support from the masses. Look, Africa. When I was preparing to come to this, I thought about Professor Alice Mazuri's 6 Paradoxes of Africa, where he captioned the whole speech by talking about paradise in decay, the Garden of Eden in decay. He referred to Africa as Garden of Eden, where we have all the resources. We are the cradle of civilization. And despite all these things we could leverage on to propel our continent into a giant in the global affairs of governance, those resources has rather become a curse. And the curse, in my opinion, comes from 2 levels. The failure of our government to conduct proper governance, and then the long hand of the exploitative hand of imperialists who sit kilometers and miles far away and yet have their eyes fixed on our resources 24/7. And they will do everything possible to sit far away and still enjoy the wealth of Africa. Honorable talked about the uranium. To what extent can the unfortunate situation of a country, a very small country in West Africa, that is one of the highest producers of uranium, together with other resources, happens to be the poorest country in the world, according to the UN Human Development Index. Niger is the poorest country in the world. And yet it is one of the producers of uranium, the greatest in Africa, in the world. The question now is, what happens to the proceeds that comes from the extraction of these materials? When I was reading about it, I got to realize that France, US, and all these countries have military bases in Niger. So when a coup happens in that particular area, it is not easy for you to decipher the source of the guns. So we are being equipped by these foreign gens because of a particular interest in whatever resources we have in our countries. And our leaders fail to realize that they are not accountable to any institution elsewhere except the people of the country that they govern. West African leaders in Africa must see the situation in Niger, the situation in Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, as the sign on the wall of the trajectory that our democracy in Africa is proceeding to. The path is bleak. Today, the indiscipline of our government agents, our institutions, the wanton dissipation of public resources, the glaring show of opulence by people in power, in sharp contrast with the miserable living conditions of the people, if not checked, is what will feed into this series of military coup d'etats across the region. My concern about ECOWAS is that ECOWAS is made up of 15 countries within the sub-region. They say a house divided cannot stand. To what extent is ECOWAS going to be able to galvanize the buy-in, the support, the resource commitment of all the nations within West Africa to be able to stage a proper intervention in Niger? It was so exciting to hear a comment from one of our listeners who said the president of Nigeria must rather be interested in checking Boko Haram. For how long has Nigeria been battling with Boko Haram? And to what extent have they been successful in establishing sanity in northern Nigeria where Boko Haram operates from? ECOWAS must take action with caution, that they do not go into Niger to worsen the plight of the people by destabilizing the economy further. And therefore, I will urge anybody who has the influence and the power to sit around the boardroom to decide what happens as an intervention in Niger to rather prioritize diplomacy and dialogue rather than resorting to military might. After all, it is now existent. Nigeria itself has not been able to deal with its domestic uprisings. How much more being able to deal with Niger in a context in which the military junta in Niger seems to be courting support and attention from other big powers who are willing and ready to be able to support the military junta in Niger to maintain the status quo as it is now. Let's talk about how military things operate. There are sanctions. And this sanction that has been placed, Benin was quick to say that the oil pipeline between Niger and Benin will not be affected by the sanctions that have been imposed. So you see that a house divided against itself cannot stand. Senegal, Mali has declared support for the military junta. Burkina has declared support for the military junta. And yet these are the countries that borders Niger. If you could ring fence Niger as a nation, lock all the borders around Niger, and stop the infiltration of arms into Niger for the use of this military junta, perhaps military action could work. But here is the case: the borders in other parts, including Burkina Faso and that of the other countries, will still be open, and the military junta can get whatever supplies they need to be able to take action. Russia feels diplomacy is the best way to go. US, France think that military and force should be applied. Therefore, this particular military junta in Niger, in my opinion, is no longer a local matter. It's not the globalization of a war. It's globalization of war. That somebody in Russia, somebody in America, somebody in France will be ready to pump in a lot of resources in order to pursue an imperialist interest in Niger. Unfortunately, at the bottom of every scale, of every matter in this conversation, at the bottom of it is the poor Nigerian who is struggling to put food on the table. The situation in Niger, honestly, that led to the war, the coup, is not anything different from many of the countries in West Africa and in Africa. We've gone through democracy, which is only effective at the level of elections. But we've succeeded in electing dictators whose showmanship and big manship has trumped every institution of government that should work in a way that will let the people feel satisfied that after all we've put in a legitimate government. So, in fact, one of the other submissions that I want to make on this platform is to say that even though Ghana and some many other countries like Nigeria and all those succeed in holding what people may want to describe as free and fair elections, the outcome of such elections is usually a dictator. And this dictatorship is as a result of we reposing on a particular individual elected as a president or a prime minister, unfettered authority and power to be able to trample over state institutions that are powerless to act, and that will kowtow to the interests of such a leader, regardless of ethics and principles of governance. When these things happen, in my opinion, the way we are always quick to say that a constitutionally elected government has been toppled by a coup, a military, in my opinion, it is usually the military toppling a dictator, a constitutional dictator. And for me, there's no difference between a constitutional dictator and a military president, because they all seem to be acting based on decrees and wishful thinking and fanciful ideas of a particular powerful individual, to the complete neglect of the institutions, the state institutions that are supposed to work to get us to improve our living standards. Let's use ECOWAS as an example. How on earth can an organization established, you said in 1975? Yes. How many years now? Almost 40-something years. We still do not have the institutions to deal with an old phenomenon like coups in West Africa? To what extent are we learning in our governance process? Starting from the coup with Nkrumah, which happened in 1966, with all the coups we've had in Ghana, plus all the coups we've had in the rest of West Africa. To what extent have West African countries and nations learned from those unfortunate incidences of coups to have put measures in place to avert the happenings of these coups? Let me serve notice to the leadership of ECOWAS that the situation in West Africa today is far beyond knee-jerk and ad hoc response. There should have been purposeful planning, well-established institutions prepared with budget and resources. Today, our big brother, Nigeria, is the one talking to the Senate to allow. What if they don't allow? Even if they allow, can Nigeria alone lead successfully against Niger? Even when I was reading today, I got an interesting thing. Most of the French colonies have a pact, a military pact, an agreement as part of their colonial process with France. That at any point in time there is an aggression against any of these Francophone countries, it is an aggression against France. And aggression against France is aggression against NATO. Look at the chain of connections that can make available military accoutrements for the use of the military in Niger. And France is interested in also intervening militarily because I heard one of their leadership said it is only a legitimate and democratically elected government in Niger that can sever the military pact between them and France. So what it means is that an aggression against Niger is aggression against France. Some other countries elsewhere that might be interested in supporting the junta. So we are going to have a bloodbath in Niger if the choice is to use military and to use force. I still once again will want to call and urge leadership to prioritize the issue of diplomacy and dialogue in resolving the issue for the sake of the powerless and voiceless and the vulnerable people of Niger. ECOWAS should not be seen to be cherry chicken, or what do you call it, cherry picking, right? What happened when the coup occurred in Burkina Faso? To what extent did they involve and how much? When it happened in Mali, what happened? When it happened in Guinea, what happened? What is different about Niger? Why are they departing from their conventional way of doing things? Is there a bigger interest that is hidden? Or once again, our leadership are being pushed by a particular powerful state somewhere that has vested interest in the resources of Niger? Niger, a very poor country. Sometimes those of us in northern Ghana, we see people of Niger, we call them Banembaka Lahbari people. They are Caucasians. You see them walking with children, even in Accra. When you go by the street in Accra, sometimes you see women with children who come to beg. Apparently from their complexion and everything, you know they are not Ghanaian. They are usually coming from Niger. Such a country is what is going through this situation. And the military activities in that particular area is going to cause more harm to the people of Niger rather than serving their interests.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very, very much.